Across town, in a tower of smoked glass that wore the clouds like a crown, Adrian Vale watched the market blink its indifferent numbers. Everyone said he had everything. He sometimes suspected he only had it, the brilliant emptiness that travels with power and calls itself by false names. A politician had texted, a pastor had called, a board member had threatened. He muted all three and stared into the aquarium on his desk. Fish looped their bright, brainless infinity. He envied them, on the river that divides the city from its unlit outskirts. Ruth adjusted the strap of her violin case and counted footsteps. Violinists count. Bars, rests, breaths, coins. She had played in halls where chandeliers trembled like suns, and she had played on corners where the applause was wind. Grief had become her metronome after the accident took her husband, then her place in the orchestra. Tonight, a supper that pretended to be dinner waited for her in a can. She tightened the scarf at her throat and told herself, only a few more songs. In a hospital where the night shift kept vigil with coffee and fluorescent devotion, Nico wheeled an old man back to bed. Nico's mother used to say, you were strong where you were broken, but he had not felt strong since the judge said, 5 years. Prison taught him many things, which men to avoid, which corners to avoid, which version of your face to wear when the lights go out. Since his release, he wore regret like a uniform. The patients liked him. He did not yet like himself. On the last block, before the river forgets the city, Amaya folded a cardboard sign with hands that shook. Some people shook because of drugs. She shook because of memory. War had carved through her village like a dull blade, not clean, not quick, not merciful. A church had given her a blanket that smelled of cedar and a word that smelled of bread, welcome. But some nights she felt like a pilot in fog, trusting instruments she could not read. If you're being tested, you're being trusted. A modern mystical allegory. Faith is the courage to step forward when sight says stop. Faith is a door that opens from the inside, even when everything outside is locked. Faith is the hand you cannot see, yet it steadies your breath. Faith is the music you remember when the world forgets the tune. Faith is a fire in wet wood, stubborn and bright. Faith is the grammar of heaven, spoken by the poor in spirit. Faith is the map that draws itself as you walk. Faith is trust with blisters, hope with Faith is the yes that survives 1,000 no's. Faith is how God writes His name on our ordinary days. The city did not sleep so much as hum. Elevators sighed. Traffic stitched light in long, silver threads. Somewhere, a siren rehearsed the old aria of urgency. 5 floors above the street, in a narrow room that smelled of soup and detergent, a woman named Mara prayed with her cheek against the cool edge of a window. I do not ask for a miracle, she whispered. Only that you don't forget us. Her son, Leo, coughed in his sleep, one of those deep, iron coughs that seemed to borrow lungs from a larger body. The doctor had said the word incurable with the soft voice people use for blunt objects. Rent was late, hope was later, and fear arrived early every morning. 5 people, 5 lamps guttering, and into their city walked a man whose footsteps were old as dust and fresh as dew. He wore no label, no uniform, no importance recognizably stamped. His coat looked borrowed from a season that had not yet arrived. His eyes held a patient storm, the kind that waters deserts rather than ruins fields. Most people passed him without commentary, the way we pass our answers when we're too busy polishing the questions. Mara met him first. She had trudged to the all-night pharmacy for a discount cough syrup and returned with a receipt that felt like a verdict. The elevator was broken. Her building collected broken things as she stood on the stairwell landing. Catching her breath, the man stepped aside and gave her the good rail as if it were a sacred object. "Hard climb?" he asked. Mara studied him for the quick second. "People grant strangers before they summon fear." "You could say that. The kind of climb," he said, "where you carry two bodies with one heart." Tears reached her eyes before suspicion could warn them away. "Who are you?" "A friend." He tilted his head toward the ceiling where Leo's cough wrote its jagged notation. "A friend of your son." She did not remember telling him about Leo. She remembered only the sudden warmth of the metal rail in her palm and the way her knees felt less argumentative. She reached the door, fumbled with keys, turned to thank him, but he had already descended. "Some stairs we climb, some stairs lift us." Inside, she touched Leo's forehead and felt a fever thinking of its next trick. On the table, next to the receipt, lay a small white card she was sure she had not brought. "If you're being tested," it read in neat pen, "you're being trusted." On the back, a verse from a book she had not opened in years. She read it twice, then set it on the windowsill where Dawn could find it. Adrian met him next in an elevator that might as well have been a rocket for the way it pulled against gravity. The man stepped in as if invited by the mirror. No one invited people into Adrian's space. His assistant curated oxygen. "Floor?" Adrian asked, because good manners are cheaper than contempt. "Down," the man said, "but not the easy kind." "Cryptic," Adrian muttered. The investor voice in his head filed a complaint. The man's presence exerted a strange pressure, like altitude or honesty. He noticed the man's hands, carpenter hands, scarred and clean. "You build?" Adrian asked, surprising himself. "Sometimes," the man said. "Mostly I repair good." The city could use less demolition. Adrian smirked at his own hypocrisy. "I was thinking of hearts." The man's gaze moved to the polished metal where Adrian's reflection rehearsed its superior boredom. What does a man profit if his accounts are full and his soul is a foreclosure? The elevator jolted. Lights flickered. Somewhere, a siren changed keys. Adrian's stomach, too wealthy for fear, nevertheless briefly remembered being a child on a Ferris wheel. When the lights steadied, the man had pressed the emergency stop and was looking at Adrian, as if the mirror were being asked to tell the truth. "Did you ever make a promise to yourself you could not afford to keep?" The man asked. Adrian thought of his father's funeral, the eulogy he outsourced, the tears he scheduled between meetings. He thought of the charitable foundation that laundered guilt into applause. "I am careful with promises," he said. "That's one way to keep them," the man answered. "Another is to let them keep you." The elevator whispered back to life. On the top floor, the doors splayed apart like curtains. Adrian turned to ask, "Who sent you?" But he was alone. Only on his desk he found a small white card. "If you're being tested, you're being trusted." On the back, a line about treasure and hearts. He slid it under the paperweight with the dried lotus, the flower that grows where the mud is honest. Ruth met him on the river bridge, where the wind tuned itself along the rails. She had just finished a waltz that used to make wealthy couples slow their laughs and propose to each other again. Tonight, it earned a dollar bill and a kindness no thinner than a glance. Yet she played it as if music were the last unbroken law. He stood a little back, listening the way some trees listen, not to consume the sound, but to complete it. When she lowered the bow, He asked, "Do you know the song of the narrow gate?" "I know the song of the narrow purse." She smiled because sarcasm is a lighter burden than sorrow. He nodded with a seriousness that respected her joke as though it were a prayer in plain clothes. "Play me the song that costs you." She lifted the violin and let something old and unafraid climb through her fingers, her husband's laugh. The unrepeatable posture of his hand when he poured coffee. The train ticket they never used, the night she forgave God without warning. The notes walked barefoot across the bridge. When she finished, the city's noise had made a respectful circle around hers. "What do you hear?" she asked, embarrassed by how hungry the question sounded. "A heart learning to trust what broke it," he said. "There is a mercy that does not erase scars. It teaches them to glow." He placed something in her case. She expected a coin. It was a folded paper envelope, light as an invitation. When she opened it later, it was not money. It was an address written in a hand steady as morning. A music school in the old district, a date, a name to ask for. She thought of scams, and then she thought of angels who worked the day shift. On the back of the envelope, as if an afterthought, the words, "If you're being tested, you're being trusted." Nico met him during the hour that hospitals try to forget. They are the world's short-term borders between now and forever. The man sat beside a bed no one visited, reading aloud from a book like a man who believes words can hold the body together. "You family?" Nico asked, because nurses ask questions whose answers can gird the heart for the next room. "Yes," the man said. "By adoption." Nico smiled at the joke and then didn't, because it wasn't. He checked the chart, adjusted the drip, and paused. "He can hear you," Nico said. "The dying hear more than we think. Or maybe they hear less, but better." "Do you hear?" the man asked without looking up. Nico thought of the night everything went wrong. The friend he did not stop, the door he did not lock, the judge's voice measuring his life in public ounces. "Sometimes," he said, "I hear my own shame first." "Shame is a teacher who forgets to dismiss class," the man said. "You have stayed too long after the bell." Nico laughed, the good kind that rearranges the furniture inside. He wanted to ask, "How do you know?" But he'd spent years asking the wrong people the right questions. The man turned a page. The old patient sighed in a language of breath. Nico set a hand on the bed rail and felt it warmer than metal usually admits. When he looked down later, a small white card leaned against the water cup. "If you're being tested, you're being trusted." On the back, a sentence about how love keeps no ledger of wrongs. Amaya met him in the church basement where the soup steamed humility into the air. The man ladled gently as if soup had nerves, looked at each person as if naming was part of serving. He said to Luis, who slept by the boiler, "You were a teacher once." Luis nodded. "Spanish poetry." The man smiled. "Then you know other tongues also call God by intimate names." He said to Elaine, whose boots remembered a river crossing, "You used to sing." Elaine shrugged. "Not anymore." "Then your silence sings," he answered. Amaya expected nothing, and therefore could not be disappointed. When she reached him, he said only her name. She did not remember telling him. Some names arrive with a place to sit. "Where is home?" he asked. She tried to answer with geography. It came out soot and salt. "Home is where trust learns your face," he said, handing her soup and a second bowl for the woman behind her. On her tray lay a small white card. "If you're being tested, you're being trusted." On the back, Another line from the book she had refused to hate. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. That night, Amaya dreamed of a door that opened inward, and behind it a room whose windows muted nothing rains sounded like rain. Grief like grief, but where all sounds agreed with each other, as if they remembered a song they hadn't yet sung. A week threaded itself. Threads crossed. The man whom some would later swear was only a man, and others would later insist was more appeared and disappeared, the way meaning does. When you look directly at it, it hides. When you look through it, it holds everything up. Mara watched Leo's cough learn new manners. He still coughed, but the cough apologized. The doctor frowned with scientific disapproval and called it anomalous improvement. Mara called it Tuesday. She found out the hospital had a volunteer who spoke to children as if they were citizens with rights. He read to Leo from a book about a shepherd who counted to 100 and smiled as if one were an important number. The volunteer wore no badge. When Mara asked his name, the nurse said, "Different nights." Different names? Adrian started waking before his alarm and sitting on the edge of a life he had not noticed owning him. He visited the Foundation's warehouse, where they stored machines for performing generosity. A woman there asked him, "Have you ever seen the neighborhood with your feet?" He did not like riddles that did not improve the price of things. But he went. A child high-fived him with the confidence of someone who receives presents as currency. He went again. In the elevator later that week, the emergency stop lit without a hand touching it. He stared at the red button with the superstitious respect of an atheist who has begun to feel observed. Ruth, with the address in her coat, arrived at a building that used to be a factory and now made confidence. The music school director wore a sweater that had grown absent-minded with use. "We have a program for street performers," she said, as if discussing a weather pattern. "We fund the ones the world would rather hear by accident." Ruth started teaching children whose bows scraped at first like stubborn doors and then began to open. She taught them the song that costs you. She cried twice and did not apologize. Nico sat with the dying man again and with 3 more, and sometimes with those who refused to die out of politeness. He learned the art of doing nothing on purpose, the ministry of showing up. At home, he climbed the stairs with a paper bag of groceries for a stranger who had become a neighbor. He passed a woman pinning a small white card above her sink the way people pin winning lottery tickets inside their ribs. Amaya began to translate for new arrivals at the church. The bosomy refrigerator in the basement hummed like a contented animal. She learned names: Basma, Tariq, Liana. She discovered that first names cross borders even when bodies are delayed. When she grew dizzy with memory, she touched the card in her coat pocket and repeated its sentence like a sobriety prayer. "If you're being tested, you're being trusted," and then the city, obedient to the script of humanity, manufactured a storm. It began as rumor. Distant hospitals filled, supply chains unchained, fear changed keys, shelves emptied as if repentance could be purchased. The city's rich carried anxiety in expensive bags. The poor did what the poor always do: calculate the exact volume of tomorrow and drink half today so the rest will last. In Mara's building, the elevator went on strike in solidarity with gravity. She dragged 3 bags home like a stubborn dog. On the stair landing, the same rail glowed with memory. She had not seen the man again, but she had begun to speak of him as a fact. On the 6th step, the bags grew ambitious. She was sinking under their arithmetic when she heard a soft voice behind her. "Share the weight." He took 2 bags, and the steps agreed to be fewer. At the tower where Adrian counted money, the lights learned humility. He had the money to buy electricity from angels, but the grid does not accept wire transfers. In the dark of his glass palace, he remembered the elevator's pause and the question about promises. He called his assistant and said, "Send the food from the executive floor to the shelter 3 blocks south." "Sir, the optics," she began. "Optics," he said, "are what rich men use to avoid miracles." He hung up before his cowardice could hold a committee meeting at the hospital. Nico felt the storm in the oxygen's uncertainty. He rolled beds, held hands, called sons who didn't answer, daughters who did, pastors who cried. In a supply closet, he found 3 masks that were not listed and 5 gowns that were. He remembered prison's logic. Scarcity reveals character. Abundance only reveals preference. Between midnight and morning, a man arrived with boxes. No badge, no paperwork, no questions. "Where do you want them?" he asked. Masks, gloves, sanitizer, the sacramental accessories of an age that mistakes sterility for holiness. When Nico turned to sign, the man was gone. Only a small white card remained on the top carton. "If you're being tested, you're being trusted." On the bridge, the wind leaned in as if to listen more fiercely. Ruth played not for coins but for courage, and people opened their windows the way birds open their throats. She began to livestream for musicians who lacked a stage and for nurses who lacked sleep. Comments appeared from names she would never meet. "My father died to this song. I forgave my sister. We cooked soup, each like a candle in a window, telling the night it had been noticed in the church basement." The soup learned how to multiply without advertising it. Amaya served through a narrow window to hands of every shade. A man reached for an extra bowl, then paused. "My neighbor," he mumbled. Amaya nodded like a queen and said, "Two, then." She no longer trembled when doors banged. The word welcome had thickened into a roof. It would be convenient to say that the man visited each of them that week with a miracle dressed in standard issue, that he paid Mara's rent, rewired Adrian's heart, raised Ruth's husband, erased Nico's record, returned Amaya's village with interest. He did none of these. He did something stricter and kinder. He kept showing up in ways that did not solve their lives, but steadied them from the inside. One evening, the 5 of them who had not yet met and yet had begun to orbit each other through small mercies arrived at the same place, called by different invitations that sounded like coincidence. An email for Adrian, a flyer for Ruth, a neighbor's whisper for Mara, a nurse's suggestion for Nico, a church bulletin for Amaya. The address was the old train station. Decommissioned after progress decided it preferred other symbols. Now, on the platform where departures used to teach Hope how to wait, a small crowd huddled around a table with no decorations and a loaf with no pedigree. The man stood there, exactly as you're afraid he will, because then you must decide whether to call him by one of the safer names. He blessed the bread without waving his hands like a magician who needs approval. He lifted his eyes as if looking into a distance that consented to be near. He broke the bread and gave it out with the unhurried patience of rain. Mara took a piece and tasted enough. It tasted like rent not yet due and coughs with their sharp edges sanded down. Adrian took a piece and tasted true. It tasted like power being redefined as presence. Like him standing in a line without assistance to hold his place. Ruth took a piece and tasted again. It tasted like grief that had not been dismissed, but had been given a chair at the table without being asked to speak first. Nico took a piece and tasted free. It tasted like a future that did not brand him with his worst day. Amaya took a piece and tasted home. It tasted like cedar and bread and a word that wears skin. The man looked at them the way you look at friends, whose pain you respect. Not with pity, which makes hostages, but with honor, which makes neighbors. If you're being tested, he said, not loudly, but strongly. The way foundations talk to houses, you're being trusted. Trusted with what? Adrian asked. Because rich men believe in nouns, with each other. The man said. Ruth heard music in the spaces between syllables. Nico felt a gate unbolt somewhere in his chest. Amaya stood straighter inside her name. Mara remembered the window's cool edge and how sometimes it felt like a forehead against the hem of a robe. Will the storm end? Mara asked. Yes, he said, and no. The one outside obeys when I speak. The one inside listens when you do. How? Nico asked. Begin with the smallest obedience, he said. The size of a seed you could hide under your tongue. Faith is not an argument. It is an agreement. Adrian frowned into the truth as if it were a contract without clauses. And the past? He asked, thinking of courtrooms and funerals and mergers that married him to his appetites. The past is a teacher, he said. You may thank it and send it home. Do not let it grade your future. Ruth hugged her violin case as if it were a child fresh from a bath. And if we fail? She asked. You will, he said, with an affection that outlawed shame. And I will not. They ate in quiet. Quiet less like absence and more like the deep breath before a promise stands up. Then he did something utterly ordinary and therefore divine. He washed their hands at a small basin with water that remembered rivers. The water's chill argued the case for being alive. With each hand, he looked up briefly as if consulting the person with the hand about matters only the hand would know. Where it had struck, what it had made, whom it had comforted. And then he was gone, or rather, then it was clear he had never been only there. On the table remained a stack of small white cards, which the wind rearranged into a fan. People took them like medicine without dosage instructions. If you're being tested, you're being trusted. The weeks that followed did not audition for sainthood. They were human weeks. Some victories cost too much, some losses taught too little, some weather asked trick questions. But in those weeks, trust found work to do. Mara started a meal train for her building that ran on recipes borrowed from grandmothers. The elevator found employment again. Leo's cough left like a tenant who pays the final month and writes thank you on the note. On her windowsill, alongside the card, a basil plant learned the city's forgiving sun. Adrian hired a director for the foundation who had opinions strong enough to resist gratitude. They shut down a program that performed help and opened 3 that were help. He started going by foot to places maps had framed but never visited. He shook hands that reminded him of carpenters and contracts signed without ink. In the elevator, when the emergency stop flickered once as a private joke, he said aloud into the brushed metal, I'm keeping my promise. Ruth's students played Winter in July because they wanted to learn how to make cold sound like beauty. She told them, play as if the person who hurt you is asleep in the next room. They played softly, fiercely, true. On the bridge, she began to notice faces. Repeating listening is a kind of belonging. A man with a newspaper rolled in his coat pocket stopped one evening and said, I haven't prayed in years, but this feels like it. She said, it is, but with strings. Nico enrolled in a night course the hospital offered for aides who wanted to become nurses. Anatomy respected his hands. Pharmacology admitted it needed his memory. On his lunch break, he met with ex-offenders in the chapel and said things he had needed to hear when he was 15. He printed small white cards with his phone number and the sentence about testing and trusting, and he gave them away like he wished someone had given him mercy with a magnet. Amaya ran the basement kitchen like a conductor. She instituted the 2-bowl rule, one for you, one for your neighbor, and the soup never complained. She started a WhatsApp group for women who had lost more than furniture. They shared recipes for bread that rises under cheap roofs and stories that rise under heavy nights. She began to dream in 2 languages, which is a way of being doubly awake. One evening in late autumn, when the city wore its chill like a scarf and the sky considered snow, the 5 of them found themselves again at the old station. No invitation this time, only hunger that rhymed. They arrived one by one, surprised to discover they were not surprised. On the platform, children chalked galaxies under the wheels that no longer traveled. Someone had set a table with cups that did not match. The bread was again unremarkable. Only the hands that broke it refused to be. They spoke softly of the ways storms end and do not. Mara spoke of a letter from the clinic with numbers that could be read as mercy. Adrian spoke of a boardroom where silence did not equal surrender but listening. Ruth spoke of music that returns like a prodigal, not shamed but celebrated. Nico spoke of forgiveness like a door that opens inward. Amaya spoke of fear that still visits and hope that has learned to make tea. Do you think he will come? Ruth asked, because all music is a question hoping to be sung back. He is already here, Amaya said, with the calm of someone who has learned where to set her coat. They ate. They practiced the new sacrament, staying. Afterward, when they had washed the cups and folded the table the way people fold maps at the end of journeys that did not end them, Mara found a single card under a chair. It was the same, and it was more. The front read, "If you're being tested, you're being trusted." The back now bore a second sentence. Faith is not the power to change God's mind. It is the courage to be changed by His heart. The words sat down in each of them. They became policies and playlists and recipes and career changes and apologies and new try-agains. They became tiny rebellions against cynicism. They became prayers without adjectives. They became the ordinary bravery of gratitude. None of this made them immune to sorrow. Immunity is not a fruit of the Spirit. On a winter morning, dressed in hospital white, the old man Nico had sat with finally decided to let go of his breathing. Nico cried in the supply closet because the mop does not publish gossip. He felt a hand on his shoulder that could have been a colleague's and could have been the wind negotiating the corner. Trusted, he heard. He wiped his face on his sleeve, the way saints do when there's work. Adrian's foundation suffered a scandal not of theft, but of pride. He had to stand at a podium and say, "We were wrong." He expected the city to collect his failure like a tax. Instead, people sent emails that used the word thank you as if it were a reclamation. He went home and sat in the dark and whispered, down, but not the easy kind. From somewhere he could not audit came peace. Ruth's hands shook for a month, and the bow betrayed her. She thought, this is how grief returns, not as storm, but as a quiet decision to stay. She taught the children to play stillness, which made them laugh and then hush. One of them said, "Is this what prayer sounds like if you don't have words?" She said, "Yes, exactly," and understood she had been answered. Mara lost a shift at the diner. Then she found a job at the clinic, not glamorous, but necessary. where she could tell other mothers, breathe. She put the basil pot on the counter, and it nodded to every receipt they refused to worship. Leo's cough visited like a relative who had learned to call first. She taped the card to the fridge with the jagged magnet shaped like a heart. The magnet broke and kept working. Amaya's WhatsApp group grew until it needed a second and a third. Some women learned English from the back of cereal boxes, some from the front of psalms. They began to arrange their chairs in a circle that could widen without breaking. A reporter came to write what reporters write when mercy refuses to be efficient. Amaya said only, "We have learned to become each other's address." On a spring evening, when the river quit being iron and returned to water, they met again without planning to. The old station had sprouted wildflowers in the cracks like stubborn parables. A child played with a toy boat in a puddle, narrating a storm and a rescue that sounded familiar. The five stood together in the relaxed way of people who have passed the audition for belonging. A man approached, not dramatic, not haloed, not advertised. His eyes held a patient storm. He touched each of their shoulders like doorways and said, "It is finished, not as an ending, but as the kind of completion that invites beginnings." "Will there be more tests?" Mara asked, because mothers learn to ask the questions that do not flatter hope. "Yes," he said. "Trust grows where it is watered. Will you keep trusting us?" Nico asked, surprising himself with the ambition of the question. He smiled like a dawn that has learned patience with fog. "Always." He turned to go, and the evening light did the thing light does when it wants to be remembered. It became gentle without losing strength. They watched him walk across the platform, his shadow briefly stitching itself to the old rails as if history were agreeing. He paused, looked back, and added, "Because endings are best when they also bless. And remember, when you cannot see me, look for each other. That is where I hide." He left, or rather, the moments emptied themselves of him in the way. Cups empty themselves of water and still remain wet. They stood a while longer, saying nothing, because sometimes the holiest thing we can do is let the heart be loud. Then they parted like responsible miracles. That night, in 100 rooms, people slept with their fear on shorter leashes. Mara dreamed of stairs that agreed to be fewer. Adrian dreamed of contracts signed in bread. Ruth dreamed of a stage with no edges and music that forgave its own mistakes. Nico dreamed of a key that fit a door no one else could find. Amaya dreamed of a map without borders and a word that kept arriving. Home and somewhere under bridges, in boardrooms, in basements, in wards lit by stubborn fluorescence more. White cards kept appearing in pockets and on refrigerators and under magnets shaped like hearts. If you're being tested, you're being trusted. In the morning, the city hummed again. Elevators sighed. Traffic stitched light. Sirens practiced urgency. But now, if you listened in the seams of things, you could hear another sound like a hand on water, like a hymn that refuses to surrender the last note. It was the sound of faith doing its clandestine work. Not loud, not showy, not safe, but strong enough to steady a life. For, in the end, the beginning faith is not the denial of storm, but the decision to sail. It is not the refusal to bleed, but the refusal to believe that bleeding is all there is. It is not the fantasy that pain will not visit, but the courage to set another place at the table and find that pain, too, can be converted into a guest called wisdom. Faith is the posture of the soul that says yes before it has a reason, and then discovers the reason waiting like bread on a table. Faith is the courage to be changed by a heart that cannot lie, And this is the secret the storm cannot confiscate. No test is greater than the trust that sent it. No night is darker than the presence that walks it. No wound is deeper than the mercy that heals it. Therefore, when the trial arrives with its paperwork and its scowling face, remember what the cards keep saying, what the bread keeps tasting like, what the eyes keep promising. If you're being tested, you're being trusted, and trust, even the size of a seed you could hide under your tongue, is strong enough to move a mountain that calls itself impossible, and gentle enough to lift a sparrow that calls itself alone. So take heart, take bread, take each other, and walk on.